Good evening. Tonight, News 8 welcomes back retired NYPD Detective Shiela Geathers, 32 years with the department and nearly 400 violent investigations behind her.
Good evening. For months, New York City lived under the shadow of a predator who seemed capable of staying one step ahead of investigators. Millicent Graves vanished from her East Elmhurst home without warning. Soon afterward, Angela Martin, Rebecca Holloway, Denise Calderon, and Stephanie Velez disappeared under similarly disturbing circumstances. One by one, their bodies were recovered. Each woman had been taken from an ordinary life. Each had family members left searching for answers. Each crime scene appeared designed to communicate a message to investigators. As the investigation unfolded, detectives uncovered evidence suggesting the killer had studied his victims long before they vanished. Audio recordings mailed to the media demonstrated a chilling level of planning. Notes left behind appeared intended to manipulate public fear. Forensic analysts discovered common trace evidence linking multiple victims. Surveillance footage hinted at a vehicle appearing near several disappearances. Yet, despite months of work, investigators still lacked the one thing they needed most: a name. Tonight, Detective Shiela Geathers reveals how microscopic evidence, patient detective work, and one critical mistake by the offender exposed the truth behind one of the most disturbing investigations of her career. The answer would come from fingerprints hidden in plain sight, touch DNA left behind on multiple victims, and a connection to Millicent Graves that no one initially recognized. Detective, tell us how the investigation finally turned.
By the time we entered the final stage of the investigation, we were no longer searching for connections between victims. We knew they were connected. The challenge was identifying the person who connected them. The first major development involved Victor Harlan. Victor had emerged as a highly suspicious figure during the investigation. His access to industrial properties, his familiarity with machinery, and his movements around locations relevant to the case made him appear dangerous. Several detectives believed we were closing in on our offender. Then the evidence arrived. Digital records, surveillance footage, employment documentation, and witness statements were reviewed together. The timeline became impossible to ignore. Victor Harlan simply could not have committed several key acts attributed to the killer. His whereabouts were independently verified during critical periods. Every piece of objective evidence pointed in the same direction. Victor Harlan was not our murderer. Clearing him was frustrating because it removed the strongest suspect we had developed. At the same time, however, it forced us to focus on evidence instead of assumptions. And that evidence kept pointing toward one man: Calvin Reddick. The first breakthrough came from fingerprints recovered inside Millicent Graves' home. Crime scene technicians had processed the residence extensively after her disappearance. Most of the prints recovered belonged to family members, friends, utility workers, and others who could be explained. One latent print recovered from the underside of a decorative table could not. That detail was never released publicly. We deliberately withheld it. Months later, investigators reviewing evidence discovered partial latent prints on two of the notes mailed during the investigation. The quality was poor, but there was enough rich detail for comparison. The results changed everything. The latent prints matched Calvin Reddick. The identification was made possible because Calvin already existed in law enforcement databases. 7 years earlier, he had been convicted of a sexual assault and served a prison sentence. His fingerprints had been entered into criminal databases and remained available for comparison. The fingerprint evidence alone was significant, but it was not the only evidence. Touch DNA recovered from multiple victims began producing similar results. Unlike traditional DNA recovered from blood or bodily fluids, touch DNA comes from microscopic skin cells left behind when a person handles clothing or personal property. Advances in forensic science have made those tiny traces extraordinarily valuable. Touch DNA recovered from Angela Martin's clothing produced a profile. The same profile appeared on Rebecca Holloway's belongings. The same profile appeared on items associated with Denise Calderon. The same profile appeared again on Stephanie Velez. The profile belonged to Calvin Reddick. At that moment, the investigation fundamentally changed. We knew who we were dealing with. We simply could not reveal it.
Why keep it secret?
Because Millicent Graves was still missing. At that stage, we had not recovered her body. We did not know whether she was alive. The moment Calvin realized investigators had identified him, any possibility of locating Millicent could disappear forever. So we remained silent. No press conference, no leaks, no public statements. Instead, we intensified surveillance. As investigators dug deeper into Calvin's background, we uncovered the explanation for something that had puzzled us from the beginning. The porcelain lighthouse inside Millicent Graves' home. The killer had referenced it in communications, despite the fact that its existence had never been disclosed publicly. That detail had haunted investigators. How did he know it existed? The answer turned out to be remarkably simple. Several years earlier, Calvin had performed temporary contract work at a communications installation servicing properties throughout portions of Queens. During that period, he entered Millicent's residence as part of a scheduled equipment inspection involving building infrastructure. Records showed he had been inside the home legally for a brief period. Most people would have forgotten the visit immediately. Calvin had not. He remembered details, objects, layouts, routines. Years later, those observations helped him target Millicent. The porcelain lighthouse became proof that he had been inside long before the abduction. It also demonstrated something deeply disturbing. Millicent had never known he existed, but he remembered her. That discovery explained why the offender seemed to know so much about the residence. It explained why he appeared comfortable moving through the home. It explained why investigators increasingly believed Millicent had been selected rather than encountered by chance. The surveillance evidence soon reinforced the forensic findings. Analysts reviewing footage from dozens of locations focused on the dark utility van that had repeatedly appeared near victim disappearance sites. Vehicle type, color, damage patterns. After exhaustive review, investigators narrowed the possibilities through DMV records. One registration stood out. A van matching the description was associated with Calvin Reddick. The evidence was now overwhelming. Fingerprints, touch DNA, surveillance, vehicle records, victimology, communications. Every path led to the same destination. Calvin Reddick.
Detective, when did investigators finally learn what happened to Millicent Graves?
Shortly before the arrest. Information developed during surveillance and warrant execution led investigators to a remote property connected to Calvin's activities. Search teams located evidence associated with Millicent Graves. Not long afterward, her remains were recovered. The discovery ended months of uncertainty. It also confirmed our worst fears. Millicent had not survived. For Ryan Graves and Nicole Graves, the recovery brought heartbreak but also certainty. The questions surrounding their mother's disappearance were finally answered. With the evidence assembled and warrants approved, investigators moved to arrest Calvin. The operation happened quickly. When officers approached, Calvin attempted to flee. He did not get far. Teams positioned around the area intercepted him within moments. He was taken into custody without injury to officers or bystanders. During questioning, Calvin offered almost nothing. He denied responsibility despite overwhelming evidence. He refused to explain his actions. He refused to discuss the victims. He refused to provide a meaningful motive. Ultimately, the evidence spoke for him. The prosecution presented fingerprints, DNA, surveillance records, digital evidence, witness testimony, and forensic findings connecting him to every stage of the crimes. The jury returned guilty verdicts. The court imposed a life sentence. People often ask whether I ever learned why he did it. The truth is that some cases do not end with a satisfying answer. Over the years, I reviewed every report, every interview, every forensic finding, and every piece of evidence associated with Calvin Reddick. I never found a financial motive. I never found a revenge motive. I never found an ideological motive. What I found was a man who appeared to derive satisfaction from control, fear, and suffering. That conclusion is unsettling because it lacks complexity. But sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. Not every killer is driven by a grand plan. Some are driven by the act itself. And that reality can be more frightening than any motive we might invent. For the families of Angela Martin, Rebecca Holloway, Denise Calderon, Stephanie Velez, and Millicent Graves, justice could never restore what was taken from them. But it did ensure that Calvin Reddick would never have another opportunity to choose another victim. And in cases like this, that matters. More than anything else, that matters.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Case Files of Detective Shiela Geathers. We invite you to return and watch the rest of this exciting story when we return later this week with another episode. Have a great evening.